This is Forge Daily with Mackenzie Barwell on the Forge Audio Network.
Forge fans, welcome back to another episode. Today is June 22nd, 2023. I am your host, Mackenzie Barwell, here to give you all things Forge FC. And for the second time now, I am joined by Charlie O'Conner Clarke. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the first episode I did with him a couple weeks ago, he's a reporter and analyst for the CPL. Charlie's been with the league since the start in 2019, so he's got some interesting insight on both Forge FC, but also the CPL as a whole. We chatted about everything going on with the team, including their most recent matchup against Vancouver, and then the upcoming game as well against Atlético Ottawa on Sunday. So, without further ado, let's get into our conversation. Charlie, welcome back to Forge Daily. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me.
You know, not only one of the inaugural guests, but now the first returning guest. So.
Oh, really? Let's go.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
All right. Well, as you know, I'm genuinely happy to have you back. I'm a big fan of yours and your content that you produce for the CPL. And I want to start by addressing the past few matchups from Forge. We were briefly talking about it just before we started recording here. Were you able to stay awake for that 10 p.m. game versus Vancouver on Tuesday?
Just about, I think. Just barely. The late
You
one.
have to say that, right? We have to say that we were awake for the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was a very strange game. And I think maybe because it was so late at night that there were times when I wasn't quite sure that was actually happening.
Yeah. You're like, am I dreaming this right now?
Yeah. From a neutral's perspective, it's a great story for Vancouver to have their first home win and for it to come 2-0 against the defending champions. So that's a great story for them. But if you're Forge, and this is obviously a Forge podcast, it is very disappointing, I think, to go and play a team like Vancouver who had been struggling recently. It hadn't looked very good the weekend before in Ottawa, and to go into their building and for large parts, especially early in the game, play pretty well, but just give up really uncharacteristic mistakes, give away goals, and then not take your own chances at the other end. And then that's kind of the way that it happens in soccer sometimes.
Yeah, we saw Mandrakar James move to the forward position in the second half. What did you make of that when you saw that?
It was strange. I think it's kind of one that you do understand in the context because not only is Mandrakar James a very good, intelligent, talented footballer with a lot of experience, but it's also a game where Vancouver's up 2-0. They're putting up almost all of their bodies in the box to try and protect that area, right? When they're leading 2-0, protecting that lead. They know Forge is going to have the ball. And James is probably the best player Forge had on the pitch in the air.
Yeah.
So I think in a situation like that where maybe your best option is not to try and play it into feet in the box because there's just so many guys in there. You're trying to get it over the top and play it to a head. And I think in that situation, it actually does make sense to me. It didn't quite work out, but I think it is one of those games where really you don't have a choice but to get a little creative because nothing else is working. So I don't really have a problem with the idea. It just didn't end up working out, I guess.
Yeah, lots of experimenting to try and make something happen there. I'm not sure if you got a chance to sit down during the post-match press conference or listen into that, but Coach Bobby has this way of maintaining his composure and staying positive. What can you say about his response, or his demeanor, I should say, in these kinds of situations? Do you find that sort of thing from a coaching standpoint is rare to see in the CPL?
I don't think so. I think a lot of coaches will feel similarly, but one thing that Bobby would definitely say all the time is that you can't get too high when you win, you can't get too low when you lose. I mean, if you start letting yourself get overly emotional after a loss like that, or you start overthinking things or straying from your identity and your path, then that kind of can snowball and get even worse. And then all of a sudden, the confidence is dipping and you're playing a way that maybe you shouldn't be or don't want to be. So I think it's kind of important to keep that, at least publicly, that face of we're still not panicking. We're still pretty confident in what we have here. We think that it's going to work out sooner rather than later. obviously internally there's definitely things that you change and there's things that you work on. There's players that you maybe talk to and try and figure out how you can turn things around a little bit. But I think the overarching message coming out of a club, especially one like Forge right now, which is at a pretty low point, you can't really let other teams have the idea that you feel that way, right?
Right. Do you find that there's a storyline going around in the league that other teams have kind of cracked the code for Forge? Or you could just kind of more of the mindset where, Forge just can't score and they're still dominating these matchups?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I don't think that it's a case of other teams figuring out exactly what you need to do against Forge, because Forge they're a versatile team, and I think no team goes into a game planning for their opponent's midfielders to pass it directly to them, right? You can't because a lot of the things that are going wrong for Forge are individual errors or like moments of where the focus isn't there.
Right, uncharacteristic error.
Right?
We've heard that a couple times.
Exactly.
Recently.
And I think if you're a team like Forge, then you do have it's just such a weird situation where, again, you as a coach, you're maybe scratching your head a little bit and you're like, I don't really know what else I can do, because we're creating the shots, we've got the chances, the ball's just not going in at all. But I think at this point,
the opportunities are there.
If you're a fan of Forge, then now that you're 12 games into the season, it probably doesn't give you as much confidence as it might earlier in the season for a team to come out and say, hey, look, we think that we're playing well, we think we're doing things right, we're just losing games. And if you're at this point in the season nearly the halfway mark, then I think that's a little bit tougher to swallow than maybe earlier in the year, right?
Yeah, and earlier they had the best start to their season yet. That's right. 11 points in the first 5 games, and now they're stuck in this scoreless stint over the past 3 games, no goals. I know we talked about this inability to finish here, but do you feel like you've noticed anything different aside from that may have kind of caused this momentum shift?
It's really tough to pin down. I know a few people have spoken about how there's been so much rotation in the team. There's been so many players coming in and out that maybe they haven't found a correct kind of combination or one that works best for this team to score goals. I don't know if I totally buy that yet at the moment, because you think that all of the players that are coming in up front, your Passius, your Campbell, Borges, Chouanier, Jordan Hamilton, all of these players they're training with each other every day, right? So they should be able to have some sort of connection to put the ball in the net. And I think, again, you getting to the areas, it gets to a point where maybe when the ball's just not going in for you at times, I think you need players to just step up and hit it at the net. It's
interesting to see how some people spin the depth of this team. Some people might see as their biggest strength as their biggest weakness,
Yeah, it's tough, because I think if you ask any of the other 7 coaches in the CPL, if they think that it's an advantage to have a weaker bench or less depth, they would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
I would love to have the squad depth that Forge does, right? I think any coach would probably say that. So I really don't think it's necessarily that. There might be something to the idea of like certain players work better with others in certain games against teams that defend in some kind of way. And maybe sometimes it's been the wrong combination for an individual game. But again, these are players that know each other well. Most of them have been together for quite a while now. So I think it's not necessarily a case of these players can't play with one another or that they don't know each other well enough, because they obviously must at this point. So
yeah, you mentioned earlier too that somebody has to step up and kind of be the guy to put one in the back of the net. I was going to save this question for later, but I might as well now while we're on the topic. Who do you see being that guy for Forge and ending this scoreless streak?
I think
I have a guess for what you're going to
say. The immediate answer is always Woobens Passius, who was that guy last year as well. I think when Forge went through a bit of a slump, and I think it was June, he hadn't been scoring a lot either. And all of a sudden he goes on a run where he scores like, I can't remember, like 6 goals in 4 games or something. And Forge are way back up near the top of the table. And he does feel like the guy who is historically throughout his time at Forge has been the best finisher on his team. I think that is what they need. But you also give a shout out to somebody like Taron Campbell, who's actually, I think, been maybe the most effective goal dangerous player on the team a lot of times this year. I think Jordan Hamilton has more goals than him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 3-2, although I think Campbell has a Canadian Championship
goal.
Yeah,
he does. But you just got stats like locked up there, right?
They might be wrong, but I have felt a lot of times like Campbell has been very dangerous, especially just a willingness to kind of take those shots. He scored that one from out of the box against York as well. So yeah, I think you just need one of them to take that on their shoulder and break this slump, and then maybe the floodgates open up a little bit more and the pressure comes off a little bit, and then everybody's playing a little bit easier.
Okay, Charlie, before we wrap things up, Forge taking on Atlético Ottawa this Sunday back in Hamilton. What do you expect to see from Ottawa? Is there some insight that you can give us there in terms of players, their team as a whole?
Yeah, Ottawa are a good team who didn't start the season very well, but more recently they've been playing a lot better. Last weekend they were at home against Vancouver FC, and that first half I think was the best half they've played all season. They won 1-0, but I think I would have been disappointed not to win 3 or 4-0 after that first half, because they had so many chances. I think they hit the woodwork a few times and just couldn't seem to hit the net, but they were so dangerous in transition. They were so dynamic, which isn't something that they've always been. Now, when they come on the road to Hamilton, they'll probably be a little bit more conservative, maybe a little bit more defensive, but there's so many good players on that team that can hurt you on a counterattack or in transition. Forge have done a pretty good job in the past of kind of neutralizing Ollie Bassett, who's obviously the star player in Ottawa, and he's been, again, probably their best player so far this season. You don't want to let Johnny Dos Santos get in behind you. He's done that when he was with Pacific against Forge. So there's a lot of kind of pace on the wings on that team that Forge have to be careful of. But I think this is a game where Forge will have the ball quite a lot. I will say for Forge heading into this game, they're probably looking at it as a must-win.
Yeah.
100%. Right, at this point in the season. They're unbeaten in 5, right? So they've only ever done that once before. I think it was late last year in the summer, but they've also never lost 3 games in a row, which they have now. They don't want to extend that streak. So it's tough to open the gates against Ottawa. They're not going to make that easy for you, and it's especially when they go on the road. They are not a team that you're likely to score a ton of goals against, but I think Bobby and the players at Forge will be pretty desperate to score at least 2 in this game.
Okay, Charlie, thank you so much for your insight. This is all very good to know.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you so much.
Hey, listen, if you're correct and Woobs goes on a little scoring streak here, you're going to come back and tell me that, I told you so, okay?
Absolutely. I will remember that.
That will wrap up my conversation with Charlie. A huge thank you to him once again. You can watch his podcast for the CPL on YouTube or listen anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, Behind the Beard out today, so if you haven't already, go check that out. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.
This has been Forge Daily with Mackenzie Barwell. If you like what you heard, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, and share.